Hello, everyone. Before we get started today, I want to let our audience know that we're recording the webinar today, and it'll be available in a few days, and you can find it on the NOAA One Health and NOAA Regional Collaboration websites when we get started. Okay, well, welcome everyone and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Aja Shamillo, the NOAA West Regional Coordinator, and I'll be facilitating today's event. Today's webinar is coordinated through the NOAA Regional Collaboration Network and the NOAA One Health program. NOAA Regional Collaboration is a network of employees across NOAA connecting our work to improve NOAA's service to the nation. The regional teams around the country periodically coordinate events like today's webinar to educate NOAA staff and partners about NOAA programs and partner programs. I'm now going to turn it over to Morgan Zabo to tell about the NOAA One Health program. Morgan?
Thanks, Asia, and apologies, looks like my camera has decided to stop working. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Morgan Zabo, and I work in NOAA's Climate Program Office and help to coordinate the NOAA One Health group. So before we get started with our presentations today, I wanted to give you all a background about One Health and the upcoming One Health Summit. So if you are unfamiliar with the One Health concept, One Health applies a collaborative, multidisciplinary, and cross-sector approach to address potential or existing risks at the interface of humans, animals, plants, and ecosystems. The One Health concept recognizes that the health of humans is inextricably linked with the health of aquatic organisms, plants, and the environment. The work within One Health creates conditions for economic vitality and growth and supports scientifically sound, environmentally sustainability, and just practices and policies. NOAA has a One Health team and will be hosting the first NOAA One Health Summit in Washington, D.C. from August 15th through 16th this year. The NOAA One Health Summit in August will bring together scientists and practitioners across the agency to connect and highlight NOAA's work on health and related issues and with the health sector that supports the One Health approach. I want to note to you all that we're accepting abstracts to participate in the summit through June 12th, and I will put the link to the submission in the chat. And in preparation for the One Health Summit, we're hosting a webinar series to highlight a single aspect of health work being done in 8 NOAA regions. So today's webinar is the second in that series and focuses on Alaska Native tribal health. While we're highlighting this aspect of health work, please be aware that there are examples of almost every One Health thematic area in every region around the country. And we hope that you can join us for webinars in the series between now and July. And of course, we hope that you can join us for the One Health Summit, either in person or in DC virtually. And back to you, Asia.
Oh,
you're on mute, Aja.
To welcome 2 speakers from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium today. Today we'll hear from Jackie Schaeffer, the Director of Climate and Program Initiatives at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium under the Division of Community, Environment, and Health. For decades, she's worked across Alaska, holistically infusing Indigenous knowledge into a variety of sectors she has experience in, including comprehensive planning, energy, housing, water security, sanitation, and climate change adaptation in rural communities. After Jackie's talk, we'll also hear from Mike Brook, who is a software developer and data analyst at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and Alaska Pacific University, where he focuses on environmental health, community health, infrastructure, and emerging diseases. Since 2015, he's been the technology lead for the Local Environmental Observer, or LEO network. We'll hear from Jackie and Mike for about 30 minutes, and after that, we'll go into open question and answers. So if you have questions during the webinar, please enter them into the question pane during the discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to Jackie.
Okay, good afternoon or good morning. It depends on where we are, right? Does everyone see the screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome to the webinar. Uvanga atika Qatalina, Inyapena runga, anirunga kikiktarumi. I am Jackie Qatalina Schaeffer, the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. We are the statewide tribal health network for all tribes. We have 229 tribes. And I'm going to give a short overview of the organization and then pass it off to Mike to talk more in depth about the local environmental observers network. I am Ingvar from Kikikaguruk, which is on the northwest coast of Alaska, born and raised in a very traditional lifestyle, and currently working with organizations, tribal health organizations, and folks across the state in a partnership with NOAA to look at ways to deliver services in a more holistic and equitable manner. At the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, our vision is that Alaska Native people are the healthiest people in the world. The diversity and history of our state is complex, more so than the lower 48, in the sense that we have a very diverse, culturally rich base here in Alaska. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about the people we serve. We serve across the state. Our state is broken up into regions, 12 regions, and we serve all 229 tribes. We serve almost 190,000 American Indian and Alaska Native people from across 200 communities that are mostly only accessible by airplane, and not jet service, but small airplane. Our diversity also not only includes the 11 distinct cultures, but 229 federally recognized tribes, 20 recognized languages, and over 200 dialects. We have a broad ecological system and multiple climate zones, everything from the frozen Arctic to rainforests. At the consortium, we have three main pillars: the Alaska Native Medical Center, which serves our communities as the main hospital across the state. Connected to that, we have regional health organizations in all those regional hubs. And then from there, we have local clinics. So that's the penetration across the network. We also have the Division of Environmental Health and Engineering, which is where Community Environment and Health resides. And then we have our Community Health Services, which provides our preventative and wellness programs. We also have one pillar that's not recognized here, but it is vitally important in our state because of our logistic challenges, and that is the IT support and that whole arm of the network that isn't really visible to the public eye, but it connects our telehealth and our technical assistance. ANTHC, which is the acronym for Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, takes a very holistic approach to health. And with these three primary areas, we were able to look at our communities and provide the needs and meet them where they're at. So the Division of Environmental Health and Engineering has four main program divisions underneath. Community Environment and Health is where Mike and I reside, but we also provide water and sanitation services, as well as rural energy services, and then a rural utility collaborative and travel support system. Under Environment and Health, Climate Initiatives, which is the program I direct, has two centers: the Center for Climate and Health and the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities. We also work in collaboration with other programs within our division, emergency preparedness, tribal capacity and training, that is where the LEO network resides. We have our Alaska Tribal Conference on Environmental Management, as well as field services, contaminated sites, air, and healthy homes. Under Climate Initiatives, like I said, we have two centers, and under those centers, we have the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities, which focuses on the 144, or more than 40% of our Alaska communities face some type of infrastructure damage from erosion, flooding, and permafrost aggregation. So we support those communities to either protect in place, retreat, or relocate to a new site. The Center for Climate and Health is a mission to understand and raise awareness about the connections between climate change and community health. And to further this goal, we have a partnership with our Alaska Pacific University, and that is where the main function of our One Health group resides, as far as working with the academia side of things and in research, and really looking cross-sector at the One Health group. We also provide a Northern Climate Observer newsletter, and if you want more information, please feel free to reach out. Under climate initiatives in this partnership with NOAA, which is very exciting, it's coming. Our first year is coming to the end of June, but we had 3 deliverables in this first year to really look at the landscape of Alaska and everything everyone is doing in climate change. And really understanding how are we going to proceed into the future now that we have this baseline understanding. The second was to create Alaska Tribal Climate Change Advisory Group, and these are tribally affiliated people who work either in local leadership, regional leadership, statewide leadership, or federal leadership. And this has been really an amazing group to work with. We've only had a couple meetings, but what it allows us to do is hear from those layers of from local to federal, and really create impacts to the solution bases that are going back out to our communities, so that we really are listening at the local level and then creating this policy and response at the national level. Our third is the Unmet Needs Report for Environmentally Threatened Alaskan Communities. And this report basically took an assessment of all the unmet needs in Alaska, both with funding and with programmatic problems, all the barriers and obstacles, and then provided a feed out to federal partners, to program managers, and to Congress to really change the system and respond to how to meet the needs of our local communities. Geographically, you can see Alaska is a very large state. When you look at the communities that are threatened by environmental threats, they're vast. We rely on impacts and stories and responses from our local observers on the ground, and we're going to go into focus in that in a little bit, but really they are the ones living it, and so we want to see and hear from them. And then we have to identify all the health effects of climate change, and it affects everything. In Alaska, we have 11 diverse cultures that are very reliant upon our subsistence way of life, where our ancestors have lived in the same harmonious dance with nature for thousands and thousands of years. Fortunately, I am still eating the same foods that my ancestors ate, but now those disruptions from climate change are creating less accessibility to those foods. And what we're seeing in climate and health is we cannot replace those organic natural foods with the Western foods and have the same nutritional value. So now we have to look at all of this as this interconnected system and then respond accordingly. So these are some of the current trends and impacts. Like I said, we focus on flooding, permafrost thaw, erosion, sea ice loss, which contributes to sea level rise, the change in ambient temperatures and water temperatures, which disrupt the food systems, unpredictability, increased precipitation, and increased wind speeds. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mike Brook, who's going to go a little more in depth on the One Health focus and the LEO network. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Let me see here. PowerPoint, there we go. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for having us today. This is a real honor to get to present to you. You know, the impression I always get when I hear Jackie talk about that kind of thing is how large and diverse and complex Alaska is. And what we did about 10 years ago was established a piece of infrastructure called the LEO network, the Local Environmental Observer Network. And we've found 1,001 uses for this thing over the years. The thing that I'm going to talk about today is what you might call surveillance for emerging zoonotic diseases. So given that this is sort of a One Health focus, I decided to look at that. But you know, I think you'll get the flavor for the LEO network as I'm going through here, and I hope you'll get the impression that it's useful for a lot. It's not a zoonotic network; it's an observer network in general. One of the things that we learned early on about Alaska is that everybody is a generalist because there's a lot happening, and so the LEO network reflects that, I think. So, so what is it? So the LEO network is an online community. So there's our website right there, leonetwork.org. Everybody can go check it out later, and we'd love it if some of you would sign up. Although you don't even have to sign up to go and start exploring the network. But anyway, it's an online community where local observers and topic experts share knowledge of unusual environmental events. And so really it's this meeting point of people that are experiencing things with people that are subject matter experts in those things. And I'm just realizing that my webcam is not on, so I'm going to put that on so you can see me. There we go. Sorry about that. So that's really what the LEO network is. And before I go much further, I should say it's sort of a joint project between these two organizations. ANTHC is what Jackie just talked about. Alaska Pacific University. I'm affiliated with both of these, and the way that we kind of look at it is ANTHC gives us a foot in Alaska, and APU gives us a foot sort of circumpolar. So we try to think of this not just as an Alaska thing, but we also want to make sure that when we're working in Alaska, we're truly serving Alaskans. So that's why we sort of have this thing with two heads. We started in Alaska, but since that time, I'm proud to report that we have members from over 1,400 communities worldwide. This is an actual map of where they are. And you can see there's a lot of high density of dots in Alaska still, and elsewhere in Canada and in the lower 48, but elsewhere too, including in Northern Europe and some places where I don't even know why we have a footprint in South Africa, but we do. So I'm happy that we do. One of the unique things about the LEO network is that we're very welcoming of all knowledge systems, and very explicitly so. So when you enroll in the LEO network, one of the questions that we ask you is, from where does your knowledge of your environment derive? And we have three places that we've sort of, carved out. We have local knowledge, sort of knowledge of place, scientific knowledge, and indigenous knowledge. And I always show this this sort of pie chart because I think that to me, it's healthily balanced. I'm always very happy to show that we actually do have very, very meaningful input from all of these three kind of angles. And so I think that's always really gratifying. So LEO's built on observations. And I want to say what we mean when we say observations, because that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So to LEO, this is what it is. An observation is something that's witnessed by someone. So not a prediction, say, but something that was actually experienced and witnessed sort of at a human scale. That's important. Specific in time and place, so not sort of these general, broad kind of sweeping statements, but something that's actually fairly specific spatially and temporally. Unusual or unexpected. So we traffic in unusual stuff. That's kind of what we do. And the reason we do that is because we think that people are especially good at noticing deviations from their expectation. And so that's what we've decided to kind of hang our hat on, is that. And so that's what you'll find in the network, is things that are unexpected. And then finally, and this is sort of optional, but I think most of the time this ends up being the case, is significant or meaningful. And so the very best things that find their way into the LEO network are the things that matter to people and their communities for some reason. And we have a whole way of getting at that, which I'll show you in a second. So this on the right-hand side of the screen is an actual observation from last summer, almost exactly a year ago. You can see the date up here. It's May 26, 2022. This was one of the early observations of unusual bird behavior that sort of predicted or was on the leading edge of what ended up being the summer of highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so this was a brant goose near Golovin that was exhibiting unusual circling behavior. I think in this case, the goose was swimming in circles. So, you can see kind of how this fits our criteria. It was witnessed by somebody. It was very specific in time and place, not something that somebody expected. It was highly unusual and meaningful because this bird is a food source. And so that's why it matters especially to people. Okay, here are some other examples. I'm just going to go through these fairly fast, but I want to give you a flavor of the types of things that you'll find in there. And again, I've kind of viewed this through the lens of these sort of emerging zoonotic diseases. So here's one that showed up a few months ago, a swollen limb in a caribou. This was something that was observed by a hunter, and probably a case of brucellosis, which is that swelling on the knee. There's a case of a harbor seal with patchy fur, something we see a lot in the Aleutians. Unusual animal behavior is something that pops up quite a bit. This was one that was a little bit really kind of weird because it was an otter, a river otter, attacking somebody in Anchorage. This is the one in the middle about rabies in Igloolik. This is sort of showing the point that this is not just about Alaska. We try to cast a wide enough net. This was an observation that was surveilled from local news media. So I want to make the point that we don't just wait for people to tell us what they're experiencing. We also go looking for it. And we go looking in, we realize that we don't have members in every place that we would want to, but there are a lot of small newspapers out there that are covering things that basically meet our criteria. So we have a whole process for going and harvesting those. Saxitoxin in regional clam in Sovunga. This blue mussel die-off in Skagway was really an interesting phenomenon. This was from a couple of summers ago. It was seemingly very heat related, but I think what it ended up being was a salinity phenomenon that was downstream of a very fast glacial melt on a hot part of the summer. And then another brucellosis one, this one from Iceland. These are the types of things that we see in the network, and lots more than this, but focusing a bit on the zoonotic lens. So everything that comes in, whether it's something that we surveil from local news or something that one of our members tell us, is categorized in a similar way. So we geocode everything so we know where things are happening. We time code everything so we know when. And then we have a whole categorization vocabulary. I'm going to go a little bit into that in a second. A whole categorization vocabulary that I think is really kind of, it's kind of our superpower as far as understanding what's going on out there. And I'll show you that in a second. And then by being careful about how we organize things, it lets us link things together. And so this is an actual example from the right. So this is that observation from before of the unusual brant goose exhibiting this circling behavior. So that's the observation at the top. And then these three below it are things that have been deemed connected to it or related to it. You can see here's in Hooper Bay, fairly close, but not all that close to Golovin, and a different species altogether. It's a Canada goose in this case. And we see very similar behavior happening. We had coverage in a local news on Alaska about this time Canada geese and eagles dying probably from HPAI. That was the supposition at the time. And then this one is really quite remarkable. This was all the way back in May 5th, and it was an HPAI one. But the crazy thing about this is it was actually observed from a plane, from a small plane flying at about 1,000 feet, looking down on a pond and seeing 6 kind of swans in this case, laying out lifeless in the pond, something that had never been seen by this pilot before. Very unusual. It just kind of goes to show you never know when you're going to see something unusual out there. And that's why being open-ended is one of the things that we always try to be. I want to go a little bit deeper on the way that we categorize things, because I think it's actually kind of a really interesting thing and something that we've evolved over time. So when we say categorization, what we really mean is categorizing in these three main dimensions. And the first one on the left is what we call the aspect of the natural environment. So these would be things like weather, things like birds, fish, plants, and so on. So it's the aspect of the natural environment that was observed. What's at play here? So pretty straightforward. And then why is it unusual? What did you not expect? So that's the one in the middle, the unusual, what we call unusual or unexpected event. So things like unusual temperature, unusual precipitation, unusual presence of a pathogen, a die-off, so unusual death or decline, a die-off, unusual animal behavior, presence of an algal bloom, that's an unusual expectation, or seasonal timing, something like that. That's that little leaf icon there. Seasonal timing, something that it's not that you don't expect it, but you didn't expect it when it happened. So that's pretty common for us as well. So aspect of natural environment, what's unusual about it? And then the third pillar is why does it matter? So impact on the human environment. So why does it matter to the observer, to that person's family, to that person's community? So impacts on human health, impacts on food security, cultural impact, economic impact, impacts on transportation and energy, impacts on recreation. These are all things that impact one's quality of life, and we tag them as such. So by having this kind of like three-pillared approach to organizing things, it lets us ask really interesting questions. So for example, superficially, we could ask, okay, what impacts are being reported near Nome? So we know where things are happening, we know where Nome is, and we can ask, okay, what's going on there? Okay, and we can ask this year versus last. So we can do that kind of stuff. But most appealingly, I think, is the ability for us to go and kind of filter our data set down to just what we're most interested in, and then look at what goes with it. So for example, in the last question I have here, when zoonotic flu is reported, what impacts go with it? So given that we ask people to tag in this kind of rich way, it lets us ask questions like, well, when zoonotic flu is reported, what are the impacts that people report? And that's actually what this screenshot is right here. This is directly from the system. I went in and I said, limiting our scope to zoonotic flu, what are the impacts on the human environment that went with those events? So safety and food security are the two biggest ones. Probably not that surprising, actually, when you think about it. Sometimes it can be interesting to look farther down on the list and say, okay, well, interesting. I mean, sports and recreation, that's an unusual one. And going and digging and seeing how that actually plays out can be kind of an interesting exercise. So that's really what that's one of the things that I think we found most valuable about this, about having this vocabulary that we've really kind of labored over the years, and we've evolved it over time, is it gives us a really good way of almost fingerprinting what's going on out there in a way that's got like enough quantitative kind of heft to be useful to us without overdoing it, because we realize that we're an anecdotal observer network here. We are not a monitoring network. And so, and we sort of embrace that. So what I want to do is, as I wrap up here, I'm just going to go through some of the reasons that this is a useful framework for us. And this is something, like I said, we've had it for 10 years, and we keep finding new uses for it, ways that it helps us understand challenges that are being faced by the communities that we serve, and specifically recently, about zoonotic disease surveillance, highly pathogenic avian influenza, and that kind of stuff. But every season that goes on, I think we find new uses for this kind of infrastructure. So why is it useful for us in Alaska. So number one reason I think is that it's open-ended. So we don't know what we don't know, and we never will, because Alaska is too big and it's too complex, and the environment is changing very, very fast. And so what is very unusual today might be boring, and nobody will notice it next year or in 2 years. Likewise, something that we never thought we'd see, we now see routinely. So this happens. And so being open-ended and being inviting of anything that's amiss to you, I think is actually an important attribute of the LEO network. Typically, when you're gathering data, you would be more interested in an unbiased data set. We actually don't really roll that way. And the reason is because we ask people to tell us to report the things that matter most to them. So this is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to getting a baseline, gathering a baseline, trying to understand your data in an unbiased way. That isn't what we're in it for. We actually want things that matter the most to people and their families and their communities to be reported in more, because we want to know where to focus. And so that's what we do. I mean, and the fact that we ask it right, when you submit an observation to the network, we ask you, why does this matter to you in your community? It's very explicit in our data model to ask that kind of stuff, and I think it's important. So, like I said, again, this is really kind of recapitulating our data model, but this idea of explicitly connecting what's going on in the physical environment with why it matters to people, their families, and their communities, I think is a little bit more unique than sometimes we think it is, because it's very important, and it's something that if you can make it explicit, then you can kind of bake it into the process. And so we made the call to do that, very early on. So what do I mean by context? Well, there's not just one thing going on pick your place in Alaska. There's not just one thing going on. And so one thing that we've heard, for example, recently in the Norton Sound region is that they have, the way that I've heard it described is almost the perfect storm of food security challenges. There's highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is putting stress on birds as a food supply. There's harmful algal blooms, which is putting stress on shellfish. And let's not forget, there's, for example, exorbitant fuel prices, which mean that you can't just backfill by moving things in. I would also say there's a lot of uncertainty around the salmon fishery, all up and down the coast. I heard recently from some community members in Unalakleet in Norton Sound that they've got great returns for salmon as long as you want pinks. If you want kings and you want reds, you're out of luck, because the pinks have squeezed them all out. And that is very peculiar to Unalakleet. Go down the shore just a little bit and you might have something very different going on. So a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, I think, trepidation as this summer kind of rolls on about the salmon fisheries. Right, I've heard from other places in Alaska, on Alaska, for example, about uncertainty around berry harvesting. So there's a lot going on, is kind of my point. And the idea of, if you just sort of tunnel vision in on one issue, you'll forget that communities are facing multiple challenges, and that's what I call context. And so I think it's very important to make sure that we have a place for all of the above. So Jackie used the term holistic. I like that word. I think that making sure that all of the above has a place is very important when I think you're talking about a community that's facing multiple challenges on multiple fronts. Okay, and then the last thing that I think is unique about this is the revealing of connection. So clearly you can imagine how phenomena that are happening in one place can be connected to phenomena that are happening in another place. That's pretty easy to imagine given the system that we've set up here. But connecting people is a big part of this too. And this is one of the things, I mentioned the thing about knowledge systems and how we do that. But in practice, this works beautifully. And the idea is that, somebody who's a local expert on something and is experiencing something, and then you have people that are subject matter experts scientifically or via indigenous knowledge, that kind of thing, being able to connect them by way of events that are really happening, like concrete things. It's very, it takes it out of the realm of being sort of academic and puts it into the realm of being very, very specific and pertinent to what people are actually experiencing. And so there's a de facto network of people that has been sort of stood up by the LEO network by way of these events being observed. And I think that's really interesting, is to see that web grow and to see the real thick network of connections that has emerged all around these things that are that people are experiencing in Alaska. So so connections is a big part of what we see, and one of the big benefits of the LEO network. And I think that's probably one of the big reasons that it's really stuck with us very well for the last 10 years. And I expect this thing to stick with us for a much longer time. So I'm going to stop right there, Aja. Real quick, little pitch. I'd love it if those of you that are in the audience, if you haven't already, check out leonetwork.org. Doesn't cost anything, obviously, to join. Takes a couple of minutes to join, and that's my contact info on the screen, so you can reach out to me at any time. I hope you'll find it intriguing enough to go out there and sort of see how this is working for us and how it could potentially work for other scenarios. And I'd really welcome your feedback. So. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Jackie and Mike, for those really great presentations. I have a couple questions here, and I want to encourage the audience to jump in with questions in the question pane so that I can get through them. But we have about 20 minutes to answer, to speak with Mike and Jackie more casually with any questions that you guys have. One that I have as we get started for Mike is, so I know that you are staff for the network, but how do you manage the streams of information that are coming in? Yeah, how do you draw connections between those observations that you see? I don't know what your staffing is like, so I'd love to hear a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the crazy thing about it is that it's an evolving thing. Particularly lately, maybe some of the audience will be as kind of amazed as I am about some of the new innovations around large language models, AI, Chat GPT, that kind of stuff, right? So if you haven't caught the bug on that, it's only a matter of time, I think. But that's the type of thing that gives us efficiencies that we that we couldn't have any other way. Now that said, this is not an autonomous robot. This is we have people. This is very much a people-oriented thing. But we have systems. We've built systems and workflows over the years that try to make this doable with a very modest staff. So we just have a couple of people that spend in most cases a minimal amount of their time on this. We have some technology that goes and crawls small local news sources. So this is the thing. We're the local environmental observer network. So we're not real interested in what's covered in the New York Times and Washington Post. We are, however, very interested in the Nome Nugget and very interested in the equivalent thing in Nova Scotia and in Qatalina and places like that. So those are the types of things that you got to go looking for that kind of stuff. And so having a little bit of technology support to do that, that's sort of kind of my area. And I think that's very important. So I'm very excited about the future of the LEO network, because I think that it's absolutely every bit as vital that we that we have a process for understanding what's going on out there, but it's hard to do. But technology is starting to fill in the gaps a little bit and make it a little bit easier for us. So that's kind of where we are on that right now.
Great, thank you for that. I've got two sort of related questions, really, that are about what kind of information can NOAA provide? So what weather, climate, and other information can our offices provide to support both the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium and the LEO network? And then, yeah, what can we incorporate from your information into our systems? And that's to both you and Jackie, Mike.
I would start that off and then I'll turn it over to Jackie. I mean, I think that we've actually got a lot of mileage out of some NOAA data sources. I'm thinking specifically about historical weather stations, and that's the type of thing that is a complementary data stream to what we're gathering. So if you think about what we're doing, we're gathering anecdotes, we're gathering stories, we're gathering events, things that happen, you know, on the ground, very ground up kind of stuff. When things really work for us is when there happens to be call it a big data, a top-down data set, something like data from a weather station at, say, Nome Airport, whatever it happens to be. And when that agrees in a really kind of impressive way with what we're seeing on the ground, that's when I got to say, it really feels like things are working, you know, when that happens, because it's really it shows that two completely disparate sources of data are in, you know, concord on that. And so I find that really interesting, and that's been very useful for us, that kind of stuff. It's also it's kind of an interesting question to think about. What is unusual? Like what is, it's almost like that's the type of thing that people know it when they see it, but you know, what are the weather stations? If you were to try to, you know, ascertain that from weather data, would it necessarily agree? And the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I think that's kind of a, you know, kind of an interesting that's kind of an interesting question. I'm gonna let Jackie tackle that one too if she wants.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. You know, I think there's a lot of things, you know, really just this partnership with NOAA, which is, you know, birthed out of climate and equity, and getting to know what products and services and THC serves and NOAA, and how to bridge the gaps so that we can leverage these capabilities in a more efficient manner, not only with One Health, but with climate impacts in general. So when you look at the environment in Alaska, and it's changing 4 times faster than anywhere else on the planet, but we have core planetary natural infrastructure in place, like the permafrost, that stores all this excess carbon dioxide. There's things that happen that cause this ripple effect. And I think we're just getting to the point where now we're starting to understand what NOAA has and how we could create kind of this partnership that strengthens that. But it also will allow NOAA to look at their own products and tools and say, okay, well, what's missing from our side? How could we, because NOAA is more global, whereas we're focused on right now, Alaska. LEO network is global, but we still focus on that local knowledge. And so I think there's a lot for everyone to learn from one another, but I really think that we're getting to that intersect just by having these kinds of conversations.
Great, thank you.
I would add one more thing to that if I could. One of the tricks that we find ourselves doing fairly often, you know, because NOAA, but also other sort of government agencies have massive data sets that tend to be kind of for a long period of time and geographically, oftentimes the entire globe, right? So what we find ourselves doing a lot actually is going and slicing those so that somebody who lives in Golovin has something that's hyper focused and relevant to them. So this is kind of a trick that we find ourselves repeating, and I think that would be, you know, I feel like I don't know what I don't have a suggestion in mind, but I do feel like, you know, your question was what can NOAA do to help. That to me is there's a barrier to entry for a lot of the data sets that you can't get over if you're from the point of view of one community. It almost like it takes there's too much of a startup cost with the data for a single community to really be able to engage in that. And so what we find ourselves doing is attempting to like filter out all the stuff that you wouldn't care about from the point of view of Golovin or from the point of view of Nome, and try to make it so that we get just to the stuff that's most relevant there, and maybe most relevant like very locally, very much nearby. So I feel like there's a lot of potential there with data that NOAA has, but also other government agencies, and could potentially really unlock some very useful data for some of our communities.
Thank you. And I was actually going to ask a related question to that. From your perspectives, what are the biggest challenges with working with the federal government across our really disparate organizations for tribal communities and for local Alaskan communities? And that's for both of you.
Yeah, I'll start. You know, a lot of it is the processes themselves regarding even, I mean, this is one more thing to add, but the obstacles and challenges with funding. A lot of our communities don't have broadband internet, so therefore they're eliminated from anything that requires strong internet access. The nice thing about Leo Network is we have communities that may not have internet, but they have cell service, and so they could access the internet on their cell phone. And so it really is kind of understanding that what these obstacles are, because I think the processes were set up for the continental US, a road system, access to, and we don't have that. So we're dealing with unique situations and unique obstacles and challenges. And so really the whole point of even the unmet needs report is to start identifying those so that the processes are dismantled and changed or exempted for Alaska, because the policies themselves prohibit us from even for it ever penetrating to a community level. And so it really is, I mean, it's a multitude of things, but I think that, you know, understanding it, identifying it, and then addressing it. And we're kind of trying to do that here in this process. Yeah, Mike probably has his own focus on how challenging that is from his perspective, but overall, from a community perspective, there are layers and layers of processes that have been in place since the beginning of the United States that do not create an equitable access point for communities.
Thank you, Jackie.
I'll add a few perspectives from my point of view. What comes to mind most for me is that with the Leo network, what we're trying to do is to build a piece of infrastructure that lasts a long time, because we're attempting to kind of chronicle what's going on with the environment, and to realizing that it's not about taking a snapshot, it's about always keeping up. And so that is a little bit of a mismatch with the way that government funding has worked in our experience. You know, a lot of the time the model is you know, propose a project, get funding, do the project, close the project, move on. But the thing is, we're not wanting to move on. We're attempting to keep this thing going because we think that the value of it is in its longevity. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. We've had to be, I would say, pretty creative about sort of cobbling together funding at times, because it's just kind of a mismatch with, I think, the way that a lot of funding agencies like view a project like this. So, and we've had to be a little bit kind kind of ruthless about trimming things and trying to keep what we're doing kind of lean and mean, because we can't really afford to be dragging a bunch of legacy stuff along with us. We just don't have we just don't really have the luxury of doing that. And so that's been a bit of a challenge, but it's still, you know, I think that it's something that we still feel every bit as strongly about, because we've seen the benefits of it just sort of accrue over 10 years. And so it's not like we're going to give it up now, but it can be a little bit of a, it can feel like we're sort of running uphill a little bit from time to time.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I have a question here about connecting with other community-based efforts, and yeah, how the LEO network and the consortium connect across the other efforts. So the things that they mentioned were like the Skipper Science, Indigenous Sentinels Network, harmful algal bloom monitoring. So yeah, is there like connection between your networks and these other community-based science efforts?
Yeah, so the way that we think about that, so as you can probably tell, LEO is nominally a citizen science network, but it doesn't really resemble COAST and Indigenous Sentinels Network and COCO-ROS and these other things that are, those are much more specific in their focus. So they're focused on seabird monitoring or weather or this or that. And we try to be much more broad-based and sort of open-ended. So the way we envision ourselves playing into that is as a feeder system to those other networks. We don't want to be in competition with a specific monitoring network that has a very specific charter, because that would not serve anybody. First of all, we're not the right place for that. We're actually, you know, this is not our thing, and we have a lot of respect for those types of activities. So what we try to do is, you know, I showed you our tagging vocabulary basically, and what we do is we keep a registry internally of these basically these citizen monitoring networks, some of the ones that you mentioned, and we kind of we try to understand where they are, and we try to understand what they do. So for example, if we were to get an observation of a seabird die-off in the Pribilofs, we know who the monitoring network is that deals with seabirds in the Pribilofs. And so we're able to actually connect those dots immediately. And we do this. This is exactly what we try to do. And so we view it as, we're kind of the catch-all guys, but we try to feed these more specific networks and make sure that if somebody wants to go deep on seabird monitoring in the Pribilofs, they know they have that off-ramp. And so that's kind of the way that we try to do that. I have to admit, there's a ton more we could do in this, because I think that there's a lot of really great networks out there, and we want to make sure that we're feeding them if at all possible. So there's a lot more we could do on it, but that's the vision.
Thank you. I have another question about critical gaps that NOAA could help fill in like the One Health context. So at this interface of human health and the environment, are there other gaps that Jackie or Mike that you can think of?
You know, I think there are, and I think as we move into a more coordinated effort, more gaps will be identified. And I focus mostly on community perspectives. So when you look at the disruption of anything in the environment in a community that relies 80% on the environment for their food, any disruption is going to change that. But what happens is communities lean into their traditional ways of living because their local knowledge is what keeps them in survival, right? And so what that does is it creates this larger gap from the Western side. And so really looking at how do we look at that from a more holistic view and identify it appropriately. So appropriate identified gaps, not just through a Western lens, but through an Indigenous lens, is really going to be important because the process is all done in a Western context. And so in order to respond accordingly, we have to lean into what's really happening in rural communities in order to adapt and create solutions that are appropriate for that environment. So I think that that's still like, it's a continual learning curve, and we're getting there because more Indigenous folks, both scholars and scientists and coordinators, are starting to see that. So creating a more coordinated effort so that it's not so science and Western heavy, that we have more this balanced approach to how we identify gaps. I think that's probably the most critical thing here, because you can't say identify critical gaps if it's only one perspective, right?
Absolutely, thank you. Mike, do you have anything to add there? Or?
I totally agree with Jackie. I think that we see it so often, is that little bit of a disconnect, and I think I agree that I think we've seen some progress, but boy, there's a long way to go. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that. And we have time for one or two more questions. One I had is, what is your vision for the LEO network growing in the future? Is it increased observations from new places, or more new participants? What are directions for the program in the future?
So I think all of the above. I mean, I think that I alluded a little bit to some of the opportunities that recent technology gives us, and how that can maybe kind of grease the wheels a little bit more. So I think that's got a lot of possibility. I think that, my feeling on the LEO network has always been that the value of it comes with scale. And I definitely think that now more than ever. So things that, when you're just starting and you've got a few things in there, and, it's sparse, you can't, you miss the forest for the trees, kind of. But now we're starting to reach sort of a critical mass, I feel, that causes us to be able to have better understanding about what's going on, and like things emerge, phenomena emerge when you have a volume of data that maybe you didn't have before. So I think that there's that. I think that speaking personally, one of the things that we've been at this for about 10 years, which is an eternity when it comes to an online system. It's kind of forever, and we've gone through a bunch of iterations. But we're trying to build something that'll last 50 or 100 years, and there's just no real blueprint for that. Is like, how do you do this? How do you build a system that has its funding figured out for the next 50 years, that has its technology platform figured out, that doesn't go obsolete? How about staffing? How do you do that? And so that's one of the, I think, really fascinating and a really major challenge that I think we're sort of staring down right now. But I think that it's absolutely vital. And as I've said a couple times, we've just got so much mileage out of this thing that we're not going to abandon it now. I feel like it's definitely paid us back many times over, just because there's something magical about having pre-existing infrastructure that you can lean on, and that's what we have. So no matter what happens with the environment, we have a place, we have something that we can lean on that can plausibly help, and that's the LEO network. And having that has been actually really good. So I think that coming up with really thinking about how we shore this thing up for the long term is something that's on my mind quite a bit.
Great, thank you. And with that, we're at the end of our time. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jackie and Mike, for your presentations today. Those were really excellent. Everyone, please look out for announcements about the upcoming set of webinars in this series. We have 6 more to go, and we'll be at other regions soon, and we'll send out the link to the recording for this webinar shortly. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care.